When the gates of the French Revolution swung open, the world changed forever. The palace at Versailles, once a glittering symbol of absolute power, now stood silent, its gilded halls abandoned. The people of France, tired of hunger, injustice, and broken promises, had risen against their king, Louis XVI. Once crowned as the ruler of France and styled as God's chosen monarch, was now reduced to a prisoner, a man stripped of majesty. Trapped behind the cold walls of the Temple prison in Paris, this is part 3 of our journey through his life. If part 1 showed us his early years, and part 2 revealed his struggles against the tide of revolution, then here, we witness the end, the trial, the verdict, the guillotine. This is the story of Louis XVI, from king to execution, the storming of the Bastille, the rise of the National Assembly, the march of women to Versailles. All of these had shaken the very foundation of monarchy. By 1791, Louis had already lost much of his authority. His fateful attempt to flee Paris during the flight to Varennes had been a disastrous mistake. Disguised, slipping into the night with his family, he had hoped to reach loyalist troops on the frontier. But fate had other plans. At Varennes, villagers recognized him. The king was dragged back to Paris in disgrace, no longer seen as a misguided father, but as a betrayer of the people. His authority crumbled. His crown grew heavier than ever. In September 1792, the National Convention officially abolished the monarchy. France was declared a republic. The centuries-old throne of the Bourbons vanished overnight. For Louis, there was only one road left: a trial before the revolution itself. The charges against him were many: treason, conspiracy, betrayal of the nation. The convention accused him of secretly plotting with foreign powers, of spilling French blood to preserve his throne. Pamphlets painted him as a tyrant. Revolutionary newspapers branded him Louis Capet, stripping him of his royal title and reducing him to just another citizen, one who would be judged by the people's justice. On December 11, 1792, Louis XVI was brought before the convention. The scene was unforgettable. No longer robed in silk, no longer crowned in gold. The king stood dressed in simple clothes, pale and solemn. Before him, the deputies of the revolution sat like a court of fate, staring at the man who had once ruled them. His voice was steady as he spoke. "I declare before you that my conscience reproaches me with nothing. My defense? I leave it entirely to the National Assembly. It was not the plea of a tyrant. It was the plea of a man who believed he had been misunderstood, a king who still thought he had served France with honesty, but to the revolutionaries it was too late for innocence. The people remembered bread riots, famine, the endless wars, and his attempt to escape. For them, his guilt was written in history itself. The trial dragged on. Witnesses were called. Secret correspondence between Louis and foreign monarchs was presented as evidence. The shadow of betrayal loomed large. Debates in the convention were fierce. Should the king be spared? Should he be exiled, imprisoned, or put to death? Men like Robespierre rose with fiery voices. Louis must die, because the nation must live. For Robespierre and the radical Jacobin, mercy was not an option. The revolution demanded blood. Only by cutting ties with the monarchy completely could France truly be reborn. Others hesitated. Some deputies feared that killing the king would plunge France into chaos. But fear of counter-revolution, fear of betrayal, and fear of appearing weak pushed them toward a terrible conclusion. On January 15, 1793, after days of heated argument, the vote was cast. Each deputy spoke aloud, one by one declaring his decision. The chamber was heavy with silence and dread. When the final tally was counted, the result was clear. Louis XVI was guilty, and by a narrow margin, he was condemned to death. The King of France would die by the guillotine. When Louis was told of his sentence, he received the news with calm dignity. He asked for 3 things: time to prepare his soul, permission to see his family, and the services of a priest. His final meeting with Marie Antoinette and their children was heart-wrenching. They clung to one another, tears streaming, as guards looked on. The queen begged to see him once more before his death, but Louis, fearing the pain would be unbearable, refused. Their farewell was final. On the morning of January 21st, 1793, Paris awoke under gray skies. Soldiers lined the streets. Cannons were placed at intersections. Tens of thousands filled the city, drawn by the gravity of history. At 9 o'clock, Louis XVI was led from the Temple prison. He wore a white shirt and held a small prayer book. As he rode in a carriage toward the Place de la Revolution, he looked out at the city he had once ruled. The bells of churches tolled. The air was heavy, filled with anticipation. Arriving at the scaffold, he ascended the wooden steps with firm stride. The guillotine stood tall, its blade glinting cold in the winter light. Louis turned to the crowd and tried to speak. His voice rang out, "I die innocent of all the crimes imputed to me. I forgive those who are guilty of my death, and I pray that my blood may not fall upon France." But the drummers beat their drums, drowning his words. His final message, one of forgiveness and dignity, was muffled by the sound of revolution. The executioner bound his hands. The king was laid beneath the blade, and in a single, swift motion, it fell. The head of Louis XVI was lifted high for all to see. A cheer erupted from the crowd, thunderous and unrelenting. The monarchy of France was dead. The execution sent shockwaves across Europe. Kings and queens trembled, fearing the same fate. Monarchies united against the revolution, declaring war upon France. What had begun as a domestic uprising was now a global conflict. For the people of Paris, the death of the king was a moment of triumph, but also of uncertainty. The guillotine had struck, but would liberty, equality, and fraternity truly follow? Marie Antoinette, left alone and broken, would face her own trial months later. She too would mount the scaffold, meeting her death beneath the blade. The royal children, once heirs to the throne, would wither in captivity. The revolution devoured not only its king, its queen, its court, and eventually even its own leaders. Robespierre himself, the voice demanding Louis's death, would one day face the guillotine. Louis XVI's legacy is a paradox. To some, he was a weak ruler, indecisive and blind to the suffering of his people. To others, he was a tragic figure, a man caught in the storm of history, undone by forces beyond his control. But his execution marked more than the fall of a man. It symbolized the end of an age. The divine right of kings, once unshakable, was shattered forever. A new world, dangerous and uncertain, had been born. And so, with the fall of the guillotine on that cold January morning, France entered a new era. The age of monarchy was gone, and the age of revolution had begun. Louis XVI's death was not just the end of a king, it was the beginning of modern history. If you found this story powerful and want to continue uncovering the great turning points of our past, make sure you subscribe to this channel. There are countless more tales of kings, queens, revolutions, and empires waiting to be told, and you won't want to miss them. Because history is not just about what happened. It's about how it shaped the world we live in today.